issues. But welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so pleased to have Jo-Anne Yau back again. For those of you who were with us last year, she came and did a great webinar on fighting discrimination and harassment in the workplace, and she's joining us again for our second to last AANHPI Heritage Month webinar. I'm Kaori Sakamoto, immediate past president of AAVMP, and I'm here representing, unfortunately, our wonderful directors of education, Daniel Sakai, and Director of Wellness and Wellbeing, Greena Kim, could not moderate today, although Greena, I believe, is here driving. So hi, Greena. Anyway, without further ado, just wanted to introduce again Jo-Anne Yau. She is a lawyer. Also, she got her JD from Florida Coastal School of Law, and then her master's in law, internet law from the University of Strathclyde in Scotland. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly.
Sure did, yeah.
Excellent. And she spent over a decade practicing law in Florida, where she represents healthcare professionals in a variety of contexts, including discrimination, harassment, liability, and professional grievances, business growth and management, academic integrity, and intellectual property portfolio development. She's also busy continuing to learn. So she's currently working, her master's in law was on internet law, and then she's currently working on her MBA, which is just thinking about that is making me tired. So good for you for continuing to expand your horizons. Yeah, so she is very busy helping the community, particularly supporting entrepreneurs, women in business, youth in sports, and the Asian community. We are so pleased to have her today, and I'm going to shut up so you can start talking.
Thank you so much for that great introduction, Carrie. It's great to see you guys all again. I love giving presentations to this group because I feel in some way, shape, or form, I'm always like relating to the interest. And even though I'm a lawyer and you guys are all veterinarians, I feel like there's also a lot of things that, culturally, educationally, that we have a lot of similar concerns and we talk about similar issues too. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen and I will get this presentation off the ground. Okay, and so I think a very topical issue, which we had, the organizers, we had talked about this topic even before a certain leader of a certain country who makes some certain dramatic headlines interfered with Harvard and their independence and their ability to make their own sound decisions regarding their enrollment and other political and ideological decisions. So even as I was planning this conversation with you, there was a lot of issues that came up, and so I got to add some very timely and some very current events to this, which is always a treat for me. And again, my name is Jo-Anne Yau. I'm at the Miles Davison Law Firm in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. My practice is in civil litigation, so even though I don't do a lot of specifically immigration issues or political issues, civil litigation is a field where I resolve disputes. So anytime there's parties that are not getting along or they have their own rights to enforce, they basically call me in and we either work to a resolution or we take it to a higher decision maker like a tribunal or a court or mediation or arbitration. I also do a lot of work in innovations law, which is the intersection between business law, intellectual property, and tech law. And so I think I enjoy innovations law, and people think it sounds very sophisticated and such, but really I do it because I'm incredibly nosy and I'm incredibly interested in current events and what's going on. So being in innovations law and finding out what's new in business, helping people protect their intellectual property and bringing new tech things to the forefront is really kind of my interest, more so than just the practice area. And so as I was mentioning, I do feel that, despite the fact that I'm in law and you're all in vet med, that we have a lot of common ground together. And one of the things that I really relate to this particular topic as far as international studies goes is that I have been an international student for most of my post-secondary career. The only time I was not an international student was when I did my undergraduate degree. I'm again at University of Calgary. But after that, I went to the States for law school, and then my first postgraduate degree was in the UK at the time because I was attending University of Strathclyde before Brexit. And now my second postgrad degree, the MBA, is through the University of or Fayetteville State University, which is a part of the University of North Carolina system of universities. So I'm quite well familiar, and I do have personal interest in what's going on with international studies politically, particularly when there's political issues going on. So I think when it comes to those of you who have been internationally trained, or you're thinking about international post-secondary studies, it does, of course, all the good things that come from that is it broadens your perspectives, forces you to think globally, and it gives you a better survey on values and morality because you see it in situ. You are not just reading about it from a book or just seeing it off of on a screen from somebody reporting to you from the other side of the world. You are actually living among people and societies who think and express themselves differently and value different things. And certainly it opens the door to a lot of larger job markets and makes those opportunities available to you. And so one of the things that I guess the benefits of being internationally trained is, part of my my postdoctorate law degree was the thesis I wrote. And when you get into higher level studies, which I'm sure some of you are either in or interested in, is that you need to start thinking more about different perspectives. Either either you're demonstrating how they're different or how they are the same and how they can complement each other. So my thesis for my internet law and policy postdoctorate degree was really about how intellectual property and generative AI interface with each other when it comes to the analysis of American and Canadian laws. And there's a lot of intersection in there. So my paper discusses issues such as like business and intellectual property, dispute resolution and litigation, ethics, and things to that effect. And so when you have the opportunity to be an international student or to bring together and kind of combine a lot of set of thoughts, it does give value to the work that you do because, for instance, this started off as my thesis, and then it attracted the attention of UCLA's Journal of Law and Technology. So it became a peer-reviewed publication, and then from being a publication, then I had a lot of speaking engagements that flowed from that in various aspects of AI or the law. And so while I talk about all the virtues of being an international student, I think also myself being a lawyer, I'm programmed to also discuss the downsides. And I think probably the biggest downside, which in and of itself isn't necessarily too terrible a thing, but for those of you who have been an international student before, I think we can all agree that one of the biggest challenges of being an international student is encountering discomfort and being comfortable with encountering discomfort, practically on a regular basis, even on aspects of life or your profession that you used to take for granted. When you see things being done differently, or you're having to form everything you've learned as correct around a different set of ideologies. Being different and having different opinions, different values, different morals, different perspectives, those things can be challenging, and it truly does come down to how do we embrace it, how do we empower ourselves to function in a different environment, and also how do we change the way other people around us think without forcing our opinions and procedures on them. So, when it comes down to, the I guess getting through the aspect of being different, maybe sometimes, and sometimes it's bigger than just your opinions and values and morals. And this is kind of where more conflicts come in. But when that being different deals with bigger issues, like what if there's a difference in laws, or what if there's a difference in politics, or what if there's a difference in religious beliefs? And I think in the headlines now we're seeing a lot of unanswerable questions when it comes down to particularly issues of religion, where there doesn't seem to be a right and wrong answer, but many people do have their own rights and wrong answers that are difficult and sometimes challenging to navigate, especially when you don't come from that particular background. So my roadmap for today's presentation is I want to go through some preliminaries. I want to talk about what it means to be an international student and how does that fit into the idea of political unrest. I also want to touch a little bit. I know that most of you are not in the academic space, but there certainly are some of you who are teaching spaces. And I want to talk about how the various political differences and political pressures can feel like the academic independence is undervalued or even expendable at times. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about responses, recommendations, and solutions, and certainly we'll have a chance for a Q&A. But in the meantime, if there are any questions, I will. I've got the chat box open, but you can also go ahead and just pipe up and let me know if you've got a question, because sometimes it's easier to have that discussion when when the issue comes up. And I've also got up here, even if there's some questions that you think of afterwards. This is my LinkedIn QR code, so you can go ahead and snap a picture of that, because that'll direct you right to my LinkedIn. And then we can always continue the discussion offline, or develop them more, or perhaps there's a line of discussion that maybe you want to take and discuss away from this recorded session. Again, please feel free to contact me there. And at the end of the slides, I'm also going to have my email address up, so you can email me there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to also one other thing is these slides will be available to everybody after after this presentation. So you don't have to worry about taking screen grabs, although it's okay with me if you do want to take screen grabs. But I will make the slide deck available if you want to have it. And I believe that this recording is also going to be shareable later on too. And one final thing I wanted to mention is there's going to be two truths to the topic of discussion today. So the term post-secondary educational institution, it's just a mouthful for me to say. And the second truth is that there's many kinds of post-secondary educational institutions. I mean, there's colleges, there's universities, there's trade schools, there's graduate schools, there's polytechnics, there's, and the list goes on. So because of these two truths, you're going to hear me use the term university a lot. And it's not the most accurate term, but it's easy to say, and it saves me from having to list all the types of post-secondary institutions that are out there. All right, so let's first talk now about what it means to be an international student. And really and truly, it comes down to the two parties that are the subject of our discussion today. Number one is that universities have a lot of latitude to determine what the definition of an international student is. And so do governments, particularly when the governments are the ones that provide things like financial supports or infrastructure. If they provide subsidies to students or to universities, then oftentimes governments do have a lot of say in how they label and phrase the students that come from outside of their particular jurisdiction. Now, one of the things that I'd like to address too is, of course, when it comes down to narratives and rhetoric and the power of suggestion. There are some negative connotations to the term foreign students. If you think about the discussions in the immigration context, when there's reference to individuals as illegal aliens as opposed to undocumented residents, the term illegal and aliens just paints a picture that these are individuals who are unlawful, who are here to who are not here to integrate with us in society. And so you can often tell, especially when it comes down to political use of the term illegal aliens, on which side and how warm a particular political side is to international students, as opposed to how hostile they might be because of their use of the term foreign students or international students. And along the same lines as they'll use the term illegal aliens as opposed to undocumented residents. And so I also want to mention that the term international student sometimes even refers to exchange students. Now, the idea and concept of international student is one who is attending a particular school or university full-time. An exchange student suggests that it's going to be a student who is temporarily visiting another school. But again, it's up to the universities and governments to determine whether exchange students who are visiting and participating in their curriculum on a temporary basis are still going to be classified as international students. And those do sometimes affect things kind of on a procedural note. So, for instance, things like whether those students are eligible for any government funding, any government subsidies, and if they get any of the benefits of international students, such as, let's say travel visas or things to that effect. Also, when it comes down to how universities and governments classify international students, sometimes it does come down to the immigration status of that particular student. So sometimes it is the question is whether the student is resident in a particular zone or area where this university is, regardless of what their citizenship is. But other universities and other governments do require that citizens are considered, to be local to a particular jurisdiction, while citizens of other jurisdictions are going to be classified as the international students. And then, of course, whether there's going to be any visa requirements to travel, to work, to visit, and things to that affect that particular student. All of those considerations are typically determined by and around the laws that govern the university's operations. Another factor that can determine whether a student is classified as an international student is their financing and loan eligibility, and or whether they're eligible for any taxpayer-funded programs. And also, there's also the idea that, especially with a lot of, and particularly in the U.S., there are a lot of professional schools that operate as private schools. And while they are independent from let's say state universities or public universities, they do have to still be accredited by the professional organization that regulates that particular profession. So, for instance, again, going back to my experience as an international student in law school, my law school was actually a private law school. It wasn't affiliated with any public universities. And in many ways, I was not treated very much more differently than a lot of my classmates, because we all paid the same tuition. There was no consideration as to whether I qualified for on-campus housing or off-campus housing or any subsidies, because nobody qualified for it. And so, but of course, there always was a very strict adherence to our regulatory body, which was the American Bar Association, and they were the ones ensuring that, notwithstanding the fact that we were a law school outside of the typical public university, that we were being taught the same curriculum items, and that we're all geared to pass the bar exam, which is the requirement in order to practice law. Now, international students, of course, they do have more risks to consider when they're attending a university away from home. Work eligibility is certainly going to be a factor. And when I look back at my law school days, those were the poorest days of my life. I don't know how many times that I looked at the dried cake of ramen and thought that I could probably split it in 3 equal portions to stretch that meal into 3. But so because I was an international student, as a Canadian citizen going to school in the States, I was not allowed to work for income. Now, I did secure an internship, which was an excellent internship, but I wasn't allowed to be paid for it. So they had to alter that particular internship to number one, to be a volunteer opportunity for me, but B, they also had to negotiate around the fact that they didn't want the employer, I should say, did not want to be characterized as someone who exploits exploits students who are looking for any and all educational opportunities to work in a work environment. So what they wanted to avoid was the allegation from from the local students saying, well, this particular job went to Jo-Anne because she doesn't have to be paid, and therefore the chips were stacked against the students looking for this opportunity who had to be paid. So there had to be actual bona fide, good faith interviews of all eligible students, regardless of whether they were going to be paid or not. In some jurisdictions, not so much. Of course, my familiarity is mostly going to be in Canadian and Canadian, American, and European jurisdictions. There's not going to be so many considerations about ownership eligibility, agency eligibility, or privilege eligibility. And what this refers to is when an international student goes to study abroad, in some countries, because of their international student status, they are not they're not permitted to open a foreign bank account. Now keep in mind that opening a foreign bank account is a different concept than having a foreign currency account. So, let's say, just take for instance, I had a bank account in with Bank of America, and they also had a Canadian funds account for me. So those are both, like, that was basically my USD local account and then my Canadian foreign currency account. That's a different situation than me going to Bank of America for the first time as a Canadian student, as a Canadian citizen, and saying, listen, I'm a student and I need, as a Canadian student, to open up an American bank account here in the States. So those are two separate things. Agency eligibility. When I talk about agency, I'm talking about agency over yourself and over your own ability to have rights to ownership. And so when it comes down to things like where are you going to stay, where's your residence going to be while you're a student, there are some jurisdictions that do not permit students to, like international students, to sign and enforce terms of a lease. So if you were to study abroad, then you would either need to make arrangements with a school to stay in their approved student housing, or find a way to have a housemate or roommate or somebody who would then be the official signer on that lease, because you lack the ability to have agency over your own contracts. There's also, of course, the privilege eligibility is things like, and I'm just naming up, for example, driver's licenses. It could be possible that you're already set to go to school in a school abroad, but you can't get to class because you live further than a walking distance away, and you're not allowed to get your driver's license as an international student. So these are all things to consider, and especially since planning to attend a school abroad is such a long-term planning situation, that these are steps that really should be added to the checklist of things to do before you even apply to these schools. Make sure that you are going to be able to fund your own stay there, and that you have enough money, enough resources, that you will be able to find a place to stay. And even if you don't have agency, somebody else that you know and trust would be able to have agency. And of course, one of the things before I leave the topic of eligibility is, and I do see this quite often as well, unfortunately, is that international students who rely on either locals to be their, let's say, their work sponsors, or to be their sponsored to stay in a country. Anytime there's a reliance on somebody else, it puts the one doing the relying in a very vulnerable position. So there could be situations where employers will take advantage of an employee or an international student who needs to be in this employer's good graces in order to maintain their work visa or their student visa, because then it gives that employer a certain level of power and control over that student. So those are all also things to be very careful about, because if you find that you are not eligible for some of these really necessities of living life as a student, if you don't have anybody you know and trust, there is a large risk of relying on total strangers, or somebody you don't entirely trust to be that solid person for you. Things also to consider are things like healthcare, the reliability and stability of your visa, as we found out that those Harvard students learned the shocking and hard way that that Trump could, if he wanted to, affect the status and validity of their student visas. And international students also have more social, psychological, and emotional costs to bear, again, of being different, and again, of having to think of all these things that are essential to their international studentness. Like these are things that they have to consider in addition to all the other things of being a student. So those do all add to the stress of being an international student. Oh, I think I'm going to skip the slide here. Where am I? There we go. Right, so I want now to talk about the idea of political unrest. And there's a great quote here from John F. Kennedy. And that quote, as it speaks to the politics and political leaders and educational institutions, is that leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. And if you were to Google that phrase, and if you're wondering what John F. Kennedy really meant, I mean, I think we can kind of glean what he meant. You're probably not going to find out what he meant about that. This is a quote from a speech that John F. Kennedy never actually delivered. He was ready to deliver a speech in Dallas that opened with this theme on November 22nd, 1963. But if any of you know that date, that was the day that he was assassinated on his way to that event, and he died before ever saying these words. So when I talk about political unrest in the context of this presentation, I'm talking about not just politics in countries amongst themselves, but I'm talking about when politics and higher education clash. And our history is filled with these incidents where those representing higher learning are protesting and demonstrating and fighting against the government. So if some of you may recognize that picture there on the left, that was taken in Beijing, China, June 4th, 1989, when students led demonstrations in Tiananmen Square for weeks, and they were protesting the government's oppressive policies relating to inflation and economic decisions that the government was making. A lot of corruptive practices that the students wanted to flesh out and make public. And there's also many human rights violations that the students were protesting. And of course, that, as far as we know, and there's conflicting evidence as to whether everyone involved on both sides of that dispute is still being educated as to the events of that day. But violent confrontations between the troops and the students at Tiananmen Square did lead to the death of several hundred to perhaps even several thousand students and other military personnel as well. Then in 2018, of course, I think we're more familiar to a more modern headline. And of course, that's with Greta Thunberg, who began protesting outside the Swedish parliament with a sign that read, "School Strike for Climate." And she and her movement, she inspired youth-led climate protests all around the world to pressure government to take reformative action to protect the environment and the global climate. And so, of course, most recently, and this was as recent as last week, May 22nd, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security stripped Harvard University of its student exchange visitor program certification. And what that meant was it meant that instantly the visas of almost 6,800 international students at Harvard were jeopardized. And by that, it meant that these students would immediately be ineligible to remain in the country, much less continue their studies, much less continue any leases that they were supposed to be paying on, any commitments that they had made. They immediately were quote unquote deportable of deportable status. And so, of course, a U.S. federal court judge stepped in the next day with a restraining order. Of course, in mind with all the harms that this would cause, not only to Harvard University, but also to the students it affected. And the U.S. federal court judge wanted to prevent the Trump administration from interfering with Harvard and its international students in this particular way. Now, when Trump was quoted yesterday, and this was just yesterday, he was asked, sorry, because so yesterday Trump was encouraging other federal agencies to cancel contracts with Harvard University. This dispute's still ongoing. And what Trump basically wants is, he's saying, well, he wants to promote a higher enrollment of American students at Harvard. That's kind of what he's saying here. I think they should have a cap of maybe 15%, not 21%, and not 31%. And many reports, just so I let you know there, it looks like the international student enrollment at Harvard is 27%, not quite 31%. But in any event, what drives home probably Trump's intentions a little more persuasively is when he says, we have people who want to go to Harvard and other schools. They can't get in because we have foreign students there. And if you notice again, when I mentioned the use of the term foreign students as opposed to international students, we can really get a flavor of how Mr. Trump wants the public to perceive international students. He wants them to be perceived as foreign or odd or different. And then Trump yesterday was also quoted as saying about with respect to his purpose of protecting the public in general. He's saying, well, Harvard has to show us their lists, referring to their list of international students. I want to make sure that the foreign students are people that can love our country. We don't want to see shopping centers exploding. We don't want to see the kind of riots that you had. So again, we have a political leader here making assumptions, suggestions, and really they're stronger than suggestions. He's outright saying that foreign students are the cause. He's making that causal relationship to people who don't love their country, America, people who do cause shopping centers to explode, people who do cause riots. And so when in considering how Harvard and why Harvard is not only standing up for their own academic independence, but why they are trying to reestablish themselves and the security of their international students, they're saying that they've been targeted by the White House as part of its pressure campaign to force Harvard to submit to the government's control over its academic programs. And while on the one hand, some people could say, well, hey, Harvard, why don't you just give the White House what they want? Why don't you just give Trump what they want and he will leave you alone? But that then runs afoul of the concept of academic independence, where academic institutions are supposed to be independent of really of any particular political siding. What academics are supposed to be committed to is finding the truth and then challenging the truth to find new truths, and so on and so forth, without being influenced as to what to think or what positions to hold because of other agendas that haven't been come up with through the process of academic learning. And then, of course, we have to close with Trump and why he is causing such difficulties for Harvard. And I go to that last paragraph there because it's very classic Trump, where he says, I don't know, Harvard's got to behave themselves. I'm looking out for the country and for Harvard. I want Harvard to do well. I want Harvard to be great again. All right, so when it comes to responses, recommendations, and solutions, I do want to drive home the message that, again, circling back to all the benefits and opportunities that present themselves when international students, or really when people engage themselves internationally, there are a lot of benefits for our global communities. And really no country is immune to political unrest. So if we were to look into crystal balls, we'd be looking in crystal balls all day long for the quote unquote safest or the most immune country for that create a safe environment, the safest environment for our international students. There really is none. But what we can do is we can create our own solutions maps. And when I talk about a solutions map, this is actually very akin to coming up with solutions maps or strategy maps for my clients who are looking for basically the uncharted way out of very novel, very innovative, very new situations that they find themselves in because They are in, they just simply are in an innovative space that has really not been trailblazed by others before. So part of a solutions map, it's a lot like brainstorming, is thinking of all the solutions that you can possibly have, throw it in the same bucket, and then once you have that bucket of all the solutions, now you examine each individual one and weigh them for their advantages and disadvantages, much like how I was doing an analysis of the advantages and disadvantages at the beginning of the presentation about studying, being an international student studying versus being a local student studying. So of course, one of the solutions to throw in the solutions map is transfers. So let's say if you are an international student at a particular university, and there is political unrest that has you thinking, can I and should I transfer? Okay, so the considerations you want to make are, how easy will it be for me to get out of my current university, have those credits transfer over, and will other universities see me, pick me up, and how easily can I make that transfer so I can continue my academic journey. Another solution is complacency, which in the previous slide, Harvard was asked, why can't you just be complacent? And complacency, despite the connotation and suggestion that it's the unfavorable and the lazier way out, complacency does have its place in a solutions map because it does offer a way to proceed in the face of threats without bringing on or targeting yourself for more threats or more harm or more singling out or more bad treatment. So, and I don't want to say, but I do think this is true, that I think a lot of minority groups do tend to lean on complacency as a way to survive their current situation, just until they can get to the next stage of their life and move away from a toxic or a hostile situation. Advocacy is then the opposite of complacency, and then we've got the Greta Thunbergs of the world, who then take their place and stand amongst those as leaders to educate and to enlighten others as to what the position is. And of course, similar to what Greta Thunberg had dealt with, notwithstanding the fact that she did inspire, and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions with her message and affected, and I'd like to think that she affected change. It also targets the advocate for hostility, for abuse. And I think we all saw the I want to say the ugly underbelly of society when they really attacked a teenage girl. She was a teenager, a neurodivergent, and she was clearly neurodivergent as well. And someone who could have used a little compassion in their critiques of what she had to say, but again, being the advocate, she really did put herself in a position that people attacked her advocacy and saw her as really just a cruel way to attack positions. Part of the solutions map is how to control our emotional wellness. So this aspect of the solutions map is to remember and not put too much focus on outward things that you can do, like how do you transfer schools? Do you act complacently? Do you advocate? Emotional wellness means how well are you going to tolerate being different? And being different is a theme that I've talked about throughout this presentation. And I put ECs in there because that's the abbreviation that a lot of people understand and know, but if you don't, it stands for executive coaches. And executive coaches are those who work with even students, like university students, but also professionals as well, to help to, and I say ECs as opposed to professionals and experts, like psychologists or therapists, because ECs will also consider your professional goals and the type of leader or executive or professional that you want to be, and then align your happiness and your goals in your personal life with your professional goals as well. And of course, the experts, with those I mean, physicians. If it requires medical attention, or it could be therapists or psychologists to be part of that solutions map. Then I call the embassies lifeguards, and I was actually just at the U.S. Embassy today to get my daughter's U.S. passport renewed, and these embassies truly do act like lifeguards because they are standing among a sea of, really the American embassy is standing among a sea of Canadians, and for fellow Americans to be able to say like, hey, I need help, I'm stressed, tell me what to do, help me out, guide me towards what needs to be done. And so always also keep in mind that that when you are in an international student situation, how to get in touch with your embassy. And again, this is one of those things to get prepared before you even head out on the international student journey, rather than afterwards and trying to find, because I mean, in some countries, there's going to be one embassy in that country, if even. And that could be difficult for you to access if you really, really need to. Then I'm going to end with my perspective here, because I've given you a lot of solutions on the solutions map, and especially in dispute resolution, when people say, "Okay, you've given me a lot of answers and solutions and recommendations to think of. What do you think I should do?" And the way I see it is that I value that education is going to cost you a bit of time and a bit of money, but both time and money you can make up for that. So if being an international student is compromising your physical safety or your wellness or your emotional wellness, so what if you have to take a year off, or so what if you have trouble transferring back, or so what if you have to start the admissions process again? That's all time and that's all money. And when I say this, I look back even to my journey, first of all, into university. And I think many of you as med professionals can attest to looking forward into your university career. How many people did you encounter who said, "Ugh, undergrad, 4 years of my life. I don't want to invest 4 years of my life." But once you finish those, 4, or maybe some did it in 3, some did it in 5. But when you look at those undergrad years of your life, they went by like that. It was incredibly quick. And so when I think about, in retrospect, whether I would, if I needed to take a break in between my 4 years of undergrad, or whether I needed to spend a little more money to get myself out of a compromising international student situation, time can be made back. I'm a 21-year lawyer now, and so when I look back at the 4 years of undergrad, if there was a challenge that compromised my safety or my health, physically or emotionally, or compromised even money and loans, I would recommend now that both of those can be made back. Again, though, when we look at it from the perspective of the universities, academic independence is not always something that can be made back. So for any of you out there who are on the academic side of this conversation, sometimes there's very, very little you can do besides maybe walking away from your job and your profession. But Harvard really is in a position that they're sending a message by being advocates, and they're sending a message by being strong. And they can't really afford for the message that they want to send to have a complacent moment. So with that, I'm going to open it up for some Q&A for any, and I know that this wasn't exactly a law charge or a legal charge conversation, but it does also open up the conversation as to the challenges and feelings that we might have as international students. So again, I'll open the floor for questions, but there's my email address there. There's also my LinkedIn and my X Twitter handle if there's anybody who wants to reach out to me afterwards. But otherwise, I open it up for any questions.
Thank you so much, Jo-Anne. Does anyone have any questions for her?
You guys are so lively.
Well, I have one that we can start with. I was just curious, and I'm embarrassing myself, but has there ever been another time in history that has been similar to this, where international students were really just kind of persecuted or sent home, or is there anything we can compare to learn from?
I will say for a fact, because in the litigation work I have represented both post-secondary institutions and students on both sides of disputes, when there just has not been an alignment in values. And when it comes down to, these are really like misaligned values, where the international student is expelled or is told to just go home. And those don't make the headlines because it's one student in one situation. But I do see these situations, and there are times that because I'm not going to name names, I can share that there are academic institutions that abuse the power and their authority, and the fact that any policies that they have in place, like appeals processes, due process type of situations, where on the books it looks like it's a very fair process for a student to appeal their position. Um, I have seen situations where those were decisions, or where the school decisions have been made before the fairness proceedings even started. Um, on the other hand, I have also seen on the other side of the spectrum too, that there are students who will manipulate some very powerful pieces of legislation in order to get their way with the universities. And I'm putting this in more of a malicious tone, because I think most of us are more familiar with we're acting innocently here. But there are students who might trigger um, statutory or legal frameworks, like human rights violations. So if there are violations of someone's gender identity, or they didn't feel like they were in a safe learning environment, um, or if they felt like there was some other form of discrimination, these are all things that I have seen, and I have also seen, unfortunately, students who have it. To everybody else, it's a very clear misrepresentation of their eligibility for scholarships based upon their upbringing and culture and racial background. Um, but because in many times, um, funding and scholarships, when it comes to asking those EDI type questions, how do you identify? Um, some applicants don't genuinely identify with those parameters, but they know that checking the right box on forms can help them get eligibility for scholarships, for funding, for opportunities, employment, all those kinds of things. And that really undermines the purpose of EDI initiatives. It undermines the fairness principles of, if you have principles like that, like FOIP. So if we've got in Canada freedom of information and privacy, where you can request disclosure of public information, because that's part of the transparency and fairness. So to answer your question, yes, I currently do see a lot of unfairness and basically, yeah, I would say it's exploitation of current laws and principles. But I also think that these types of disputes between students and academic institutions and politics, they've been going on for some time. So even when we can go back in the '60s, where we had segregation issues in the United States, or gender issues, where I mean, even in my practice now, to see a female lawyer in her, if she's age 60 or age 70, that's very unusual. But to see a 60 or 70-year-old male lawyer, that's still relatively common. But it's because of the way um, academic institutions were before, and those were in alignment with current social and political um, values at the time. So it did take somebody to change something somewhere along the line, and so there is going to be that friction. I think I think there always is going to be that friction. And that's why I think making a solutions map for each individual student, and knowing what fights they might have to fight, and knowing what kind of resilience they're going to need to pull out of themselves before they put themselves in that situation is probably the best way to go.
Thank you.
Hi, can I ask a question if the time is still okay?
Sure.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
sure.
Hi, I'm Seika. I'm from Japan. I'm a scientist in Ohio right now, but I'm connected to Japanese people in academia, and they have like students who are interested in coming here to study, or themselves are interested in coming. whatever. There are rumors now among them, like really they're wondering about, like there are rumors that the American government can confiscate their cell phone if you are international here, look everything about you, and you have no right to fight back. That's one thing. Other thing was like even a small traffic violation can result in deportation.
Yes.
Um, is are these things like real or like what kind of advice I can give to them if they ask?
Yeah. And so you're getting asked some very big questions that even lawyers need to first of all put some parameters around the answers that you're going to give. So when you're talking about border crossing situations, and I'm actually considering that right now because I've got a trip to Utah planned with my daughter in about a month. And so coming across the border, a lot of Canadians and a lot of other visitors to the US are considering when I cross the border, do I need to have what they call a burner phone? So not your actual cell phone, but a phone that you just put in your old SIM card, but it really doesn't have your traces of information. Do you need to be concerned about that? And I think on one hand, it's if there are things that you want to keep private, if there are things that you don't want seen, um, then certainly do what you can to keep it away from the border crossings. At border crossings, you have a lower level of expectation of privacy. So it's not like when you go to the shopping center, go to the malls, go to the movies. You have a higher expectation of privacy that the person who takes your movie ticket isn't also going to search your pocket and your phone. But because border crossings, and really, I'd say most border crossings between countries, those officials have a higher level of authority to make sure that there's no threats entering into the country. So, and it doesn't even have to be politically sensitive information. It could even just be that you don't want it known that, let's say if you're a single adult and you don't have travel partners with you, maybe that's one of the things that you want to prevent. Conversations that concerned friends had with you over your phone because you don't want to be seen as the single lone traveler who is an easier person to pick on. You know what I'm saying? So we don't necessarily have to be hiding anything or having any sinister reasons, but I think if for people who want a higher level of privacy going into any border crossing, not just the US, I think certainly if there's something you don't want found out or confiscated, keep it at home. And then as to your second question, which related to, remind me again, what was your second question related to?
Like small traffic violation, like speeding ticket. So once they are here, but if you make small mistake, that can result in deportation, which seems to be very extreme.
Yes. Okay. And so I can speak to that on both the Canada and US side as well, because I am licensed in Alberta, Canada, and also I practice law in Florida. So interestingly, Canada's laws are all, particularly when it comes to crimes, it's nationwide. The whole country follows the same set of criminal laws. But in the states, each state has their own version of their own criminal laws. Okay, so Georgia will be different from Florida, will be different from Virginia, will be different from California. And even though their immigration laws are federal, so it's the same across the country, the way that a particular crime is classified, if it's committed in one state, then the student might be fined from deportation. But in another state, it might be classified as a higher level crime, in which case they were just unfortunate to have committed that act in a state that considers it to be a higher level crime. And I give you the example of cannabis, okay? Because of course in Canada, cannabis, in personal quantities, it's been decriminalized, but across the border over to the U.S., there's very few U.S. jurisdictions. I want to say maybe 12 states. That number might be off, but give or take. Um, but most states are not in alignment with decriminalizing even personal quantities of marijuana. So that's what I think people need to be careful of, is particular state to state. It's so easy. And how easy is it to cross from one state's border into another? And then, if you're 5 miles into one state with the wrong set of laws, that could lead to deportation. Whereas in your own home state, that might not have been an issue. And so certainly that's a consideration for not even just international students, but just non-resident students. So maybe a student who is a resident of California, U.S. And a U.S. citizen, um, they might be subjected to different laws and different treatment as a student, let's say in Colorado, because now they're a non-resident student, and the rules could apply to them differently than for residents. But I'm just using those as examples. But I wish I had a more clear answer for you. But really, it comes down to, with 50 different states, there are 50 different answers to that question. So just be
Yeah,
prepared and be most
thank you.
conservative.
Yeah. And we are in Ohio. It's like one of the worst places. Like, so do we have time? Is it okay?
I have time. I have time.
Okay. So the state of Ohio has tried to pass this bill, that would prohibit any Chinese individual to own a land 25 miles radius from military base or any critical structures. And if you map that, it's whole Ohio. And so obviously the Asian community is super upset right now. And my
Mhm,
friend who is on J1 visa, and also his girlfriend who is a student visa, they
mhm.
wanna, like, they go to hearing and stuff, but now they're worried that, doing that kind of activity, opposing this bill might work against them. I don't know, but we think we have like freedom of speech, even if we are international foreigners. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and so I definitely agree. Freedom of speech is there, but that's not
Mm,
what the authorities who want to silence you, they're not going to attack you on freedom of speech. They're going to
mm,
attack you on something that they can actually put their teeth on, and they're going to say you're disturbing the peace, that you're causing unrest, that
mm,
So they're not going to call it. They're not going to say you're not allowed to say that. They're going to say
yeah.
you can say whatever you want, but you were disturbing the peace, and disturbing the peace
Hmm.
could be in
Yeah.
Ohio. I love, you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? So it really does all depend. But again, I go back to that bucket list, the solutions map. One of the solutions on there is complacency, and one of them is advocacy. And
Hmm.
I, for one, I think I'm a lawyer because I tend to resort to advocacy. I'm always saying what's on my mind, and I'm Chinese too. So a lot of my aunties and uncles, they're like, "Oh, you say so much, like such a nice, pretty girl. Don't say
Right.
so much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Keep quiet." I'm like, "How can I keep quiet?"
I totally understand. Yeah.
Yeah, but because I don't keep
Yeah.
quiet, that gets me into situations that um, yeah, I could be totally right, but it brings a lot of challenging situations on me. And then that brings along the other things that I would deal with, things like feeling different, feeling lonely because nobody else is taking my side, feeling frustrated. But also, I mean, look at Greta Thunberg, and I really like her or hate her, believe her messages or not. I really admire the fact that she was able to be a young, impressionable teenage girl and have so much of the world criticize her and really say terrible, horrible, mean things to her. And she, like, even if it affected her internally, she processed it. Yeah, I think in a very healthy way to say, okay, you might say that, but I think you're wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I think you're wrong. This is how I believe. And so because it doesn't bother what my aunties and uncles say about me doesn't bother me. But my cousins, who are all doctors and pharmacists, like they don't say anything, but they're very good doctors and very good pharmacists because they the solution of complacency in their solutions map fits with them and fits with their personality. So I think it's
Right.
but then they do also get very frustrated and they do have a lot of resentment with the way they're treated sometimes because they can't express themselves or they feel like they're unheard. And that's what
Mhm.
happens with complacency is you feel like you're always being oppressed and undermined.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, but yeah, I think we
Yeah.
need to find a balance between the complacency and advocacy.
Hmm. I definitely agree. And honestly, I think a balance is actually really what gets the conversations, what gives our conversations traction. Because again, I go back to Greta Thunberg. When she first came on the scene, she was very active, very angry, and everyone just saw her as like, oh, what an angry little girl. And
Mhm.
her anger and her emotions, I think, really stole away from her credibility. because people wanted to assign her positions as emotional and irrational. But she did have a lot of logical things to say. So I think when we also take a stand of like more, maybe not complacency, but maybe more objectivity, if we could be more objective and remove emotion from the position that we want to stand for, I think it's very helpful. But again, I also think that there are times that, and I put Tiananmen Square up there as an example because it seemed, at least to me, that the student demonstrations in the early days and weeks started off very objectively. They were silent protests. There wasn't a lot of violence. There wasn't a lot of interaction between the students and the government. But as the weeks went by, that's when hostility started to build up, and that's when shots were fired, tanks were rolling over people, fights broke out. So, I think exactly you're right. There is a balance, but I think objectivity is probably the most persuasive way to go.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions for Jo-Anne? All right, well, we've gone a little bit over, but we started late, so appreciate everyone for hanging in there. And thank you so much, Jo-Anne. Always so educational. I learned a lot from you. So
Oh, thanks for having me.
appreciate you taking the time. And thanks
Thank
everyone
you.
for joining us on a Friday afternoon.
Anytime. I'd love to come back again and have another chat with you folks. But until then, have a good one. Enjoy the weather.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.